Okay guys, welcome to the KDS tactical meeting. It's been a while since we had one, and it's been a very exciting few weeks. First of all, I just wanted to say that each one of you should be proud of what we've achieved together in these last days and weeks. And there's really three big achievements that are milestones in where KDS is going. And the first biggest achievement is we managed to get a full KDS roster for the first time in a little while. We've done this in the past, but in the last three wars, we managed to get a full KDS 50-man roster, 0 mercs, and this is incredible, especially in the context where most of the companies are either stagnant or declining, disbanding, and it just shows the power of what we're doing and the fact that we're on the right track. Second biggest achievement is us being able to transition back to the quadrant system. We've done this in the past, but within 3 wars we managed to move to the quadrant system again, and it was a stepwise approach, but nevertheless from a full Zerg type of fighting we moved to pretty much a full quadrant system, and that's absolutely remarkable. And the third biggest achievement is the fact that we actually have the most, if not one of the most active PvP guilds in New World. And when I'm saying that, we take everything into consideration: wars, open world PvP, and of course OPRs and other smaller activities. But nevertheless, every night we basically have some activity that involves PvP to some extent. We do have occasional social nights, but overall we're very active in PvP, and this in turn means that we attract a lot of people, but equally so not everybody chooses to stay for various reasons, but mostly because KDS is not really a good fit for them. So the way I wanted to kick off this tactical meeting is just with a little analogy. So moving to the quadrant system, basically a quadrant system cannot work unless everything works like a clockwork. And for example, this is the inner part of a watch, and as you can see, there's small wheels, there's larger wheels, and they all need to work together. So each wheel plays its role. And let's say, for example, this small wheel, if it stops working or it works faster or slower, it affects all the other wheels. And it's the same with the quadrant system. Everybody needs to play their part as best as they can. So if your role is to be in a specific area or you have a specific task, you need to do it as best as you can, just so the other wheels and other elements of the army can work really well. And that's why in the quadrant system it's very important that everybody is very disciplined and works really well together. So I thought this analogy is particularly good. So the next thing I wanted to touch upon is some of the very basics, and this has been raised by a few people, especially who have English as a second language, or perhaps the English level is not very good. And I wanted to just touch upon what we mean when we say certain things in wars, when you hear certain things being shot called. So the war camp is really where we spawn, and as an attacker. So generally speaking, the attackers spawn in the war camp, the defenders spawn in the fort. And the most important things are really how you get to different places. So the woods is the area where the trees, bonfire is the big pillar of woods on fire, the point is the point, so the objective we need to capture. When we say the road, it means the road leading to the point. When we say the ramp, it means the road leading from the point towards the fort. The rocks are the pillar of rocks towards the fort, and basically you need to climb on them to fight, and you have them to the left and to the right. The palisades is the wooden structure on top of those rocks. And fort side is really the area between those palisades and the fort wall marked here. Of course, this applies to every single one of those 3 points. So on each point, you will have a very similar setup. And clearly, the bottom blue circle is the fort. Okay, so this is in a nutshell the elements that you need to recognize when certain shortcodes are being made. Okay, this is a snapshot of our current roster, and so far what we've done is really to try to build a roster that made sense, but what we tried to do with our roster is to accommodate more to the players rather than have an ideal roster. And the other day, one of the members asked me, "Hey, Ellen, what would be your dream roster? What would be your dream setup?" And it just made me realize that if we want to step up and move to the next level in terms of how we perform in wars specifically, we more or less need to have a dream setup. Of course, we can't have an army 90% made of bruisers and 10% made of healers. Of course, everybody has its role, but equally so, we can't have too much of something or make compromises with certain groups just because they play together and they want to play a build that doesn't particularly make sense in the current meta, or it's a bit outdated. And equally so, the roster needs to be competitive. And there's 2 ways to make the roster competitive. You either recruit lots of people who are competitive, but that comes with a little bit of toxicity and a lot of bad vibes around the company, especially if you're not winning. But a second way to do it is almost to try to make 2 halves of the roster, and I'm more inclined that we should go that way. And what that really means is that the whole of the army cannot work without a strong core. And when I say strong core, these are the groups that hold the biggest fights, the ones that take it into their face. And for example, this is a copy of a roster from Division, who are no longer playing, they have disbanded, but it just shows that it's a similar setup to what we're already running right now. As you can see, there's 2 point groups, 2 hunter assassin groups which have bows as well, and all the other ones are Zerg groups. Of course, they have more medium bruisers, and this setup has been more suited to pre-patch. And what we'll try to do is basically make the first 5 groups super competitive. These will be made out of your best players, players who are the most active in the company, and the players who play together. And the second half of the roster will be people who still need to get to that point. So they need to improve their communication, they need to improve their gear, perhaps they need to work better together, perhaps just be a bit more active and try to do more stuff with their group. And this comes with time, and the way we're going to sort of help them step up and achieve that is by, for example, filling them in the top 5 teams. For example, if the top one of the top teams goes and practices in OPRs, let's say, and they have a spot available, you should try to join those groups. And it doesn't mean somebody's necessarily better than you, it just means they are a bit stronger than you when it comes to wars. So it should first of all motivate people to try to do better, to step up, and despite sort of have this virtual division, I want all the groups eventually to get to that point where they work really well together and deliver on what they're supposed to do. So currently this is our roster the way it is. Most likely I will rework it to be more similar to what we want to run. Okay, so like I said, the main teams will be the ones who take the worst fights that we are getting. Okay, they will be in the positions which get bombed most. Basically, it gives a bit of breathing space to the groups who need to still develop further or develop more, and ultimately that should make the overall experience for everybody a lot better and worse. Okay, so I will work on these teams, and we'll make it happen. The second thing that we'll improve is work on having somebody leading these teams, and naturally this comes to bruisers. They tend to lead a bit more, they're in the front, they tend to be vocal as well, mostly complaining, but they are more vocal than most of the other players, so naturally it comes to the bruisers. So there will be some people who will be asked to step up to lead their teams, and when we say lead the team, it doesn't mean come up with your own plan in the middle of the war and decide that your group should, I don't know, go to somewhere completely different because you believe that's better than what the shot call says. No. As a team leader, there's really three things you need to do in a war. First, get your team together, okay? Your team should be grouped up. Second, you should try to coordinate with that team to make sure you combo efficiently, you bomb efficiently, and basically you get the biggest impact on the battlefield from the group and the setup you have. And thirdly, you should be able to communicate back and feedback to the shot caller about what's happening. Okay, there's no way that the main shot caller can see absolutely everything, so any information such as a certain quadrant is being overrun, or perhaps enemies are flanking us from one side or the other, it's extremely important. So those are really the three roles that a team leader should have. Of course, what in turn that means for all the teams is that the team leaders will try to work a bit with everybody. They will have a little bit of freedom in terms of if they want somebody specific in their team, we can arrange that rather than Elendil having to make teams and make sure they work. Okay, so this was the most important part of the roster itself, of the roster discussion. The second element of the tactical meeting today is to really discuss the second most important thing, which is really the strategy and how we're going to fight the fights from now on. And the one thing which you notice, this, if you've been to our last three wars, you notice that this is pretty much our current strategy. There's a lot of drawings, more or less successful, that Elendil's, and these are the elements of the fight that we need to control: the backline, the clump, and our backline. And I'm going to share with you the division sort of previous battle plans, and you can see the similarities are quite cunning. The same bad drawing, the same points, slightly different setup around the points, emphasis on being closer to the points, and foresight very, very similar. Okay, so it's absolutely amazing to see how close we are to play the way wars are played in the meta. It's just a matter of, you know, taking that extra step, making sure the teams are competitive, they're working together, and they're communicating with each other. So it just shows that we're getting better every time. We're pretty much there in terms of what some other companies are doing, and all in all is where we're supposed to get to. So for example, the future setup that we're going to have is we're going to have what you saw that we did in the last few wars is we have two flanks. So we play a 3-quadrant system where 5 and 6, for example, is the left flank, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the right flank, and everybody else is behind the point. The enemies, of course, can push towards the point, and if they do so, we try to punish them. And this in turn counters a little bit their meta, where they try to push from the road and try to flank us. So the groups who are there, they are strongest groups, and basically what in turn that achieves is that if they want to outflank us, they need to go way around. Okay, so basically we're stopping them from outflanking us and rushing to our backline. Okay, and as you could see, every war we had, there was an improvement in that, and we're getting more and more successful in countering that. But ultimately, the first two teams will end up being, again, point teams, and they need to create that pressure. So it's about finding the balance, whether two teams are enough on the road. I feel that they're not, so some of the point teams perhaps need to help, or maybe some of the backline teams, which are in the second half of the roster, need to help support that role. Because I think the meta now is really more into a flanking and sort of zerging clump type fighting. So whoever flanks the enemy is better, puts pressure on the enemy backline while their backline is safe and controls the clump, generally speaking, will win the fight. Okay, so most likely our formation will be something similar to what you see here. Like I said, we'll have two groups on the point, and the others will be placed like that. Now the question is, how do you move to the next point? And what I wanted to point out is that if the normal way we do it, we just call it out how we're supposed to go, but in reality is that we're running a bit disorganized towards B, and you can have all these different patterns of how people get to B. What I want us to do is try to move as a formation. Okay, so if we have a set formation, I still want people to be in that same formation when we move to the next objective. Your flank group still needs to protect your flank. We can't just give that up because people run blindly to where they need to get to. So maintaining that formation protects us and makes sure everybody gets to the point, rather than for example, the enemy is just ignoring our bruisers and then just hitting our backline because the bruisers keep running, and of course it's very easy to catch the backline. And we should be doing that at every single point wherever we go, and that will ensure that we're consistent and we can tweak things depending on who we fight and how we fight. And for the fourth phase, most likely we will mirror things. There might be still a case of putting some teams in the back, but realistically, the first few fights we're going to have is we're just going to pressure the front gates until we get more comfortable in terms of getting used to pushing efficiently in the fort, and most of the pushes will come from the B gate. Okay, so in terms of the strategy, this will be the mainstay of the strategy, and as you can see, teams 1 to 5 will be there. They'll be holding the front. They'll be taking the most punishment from all our enemies, and that's why it's so crucial that they are our strongest teams that we can possibly put together, and that will help everybody really. Okay, so the third element of the tactical meeting is to go through some examples from the videos we had in the last 3 wars of something we've done really well, something we've done less well, or something that we got worse at as the wars succeeded each other. Okay, so this is the first thing. This is the first war we had against Ascend in first slide, and what I want you to focus on is how we get to the point itself. Okay, as you can see, we're all running to C. We have a pretty clear plan. We're reasonably close together, but still a bit spread, more or less along a line to the left, and as you can see, they're quite aggressive to try to stop us, and straight away they're sort of in our face, outflanking us. The first thing to say is we're way too spread across this line, so basically we're a long line of soldiers instead of being grouped together in a circle, more like this, and basically way too spread to be able to turn and fight. Ultimately, we need to turn and stop them from basically outflanking us. So we're giving them our worst side, and we're not really defending it, so they can easily just hit us hard and focus the weakest targets. Okay, we do try to control a little bit here. We have 3 teams that are assigned to do it, but as you can see, there's only like 3 or 4 players who actually fight when we're supposed to fight. So all in all, it's quite inefficient. You can see some of our mages are stuck there, so they didn't get into position either. So overall, very inefficient way, and they very easily capitalize on that and take advantage of a lack of discipline and organization there. The next war was really the war against Mongolia, and it was in Brimstone. Very similar sort of setup, just a little bit more sandy, and again the enemies do come out. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to focus at what this guy is doing, okay, in the beginning of the fight. And he's only one person, okay, so you will think, okay, what will happen? Okay, it's very similar. You could argue, yes, they're a little bit more reserved, they're not as aggressive, they're kind of stopping on the hill. But just have a look at what happens well, with that person, okay? So now he's up on the hill there. You would think, okay, he's a bit aggressive there, and he throws his POD, and basically all the enemies stop because they're not too sure what will happen. We will push into them. Basically, as a single person, he staggered half of their roster who was taking positions into hitting us in the flank. Okay, so imagine if more than one person would do that. Okay, what you would achieve is you would protect your army from reaching the objective, so you would give everybody the space to be able to get to where they need to get to safely, and which in turn gives us more time to organize ourselves, position ourselves in the quadrants where we need to be. Okay, so that single one person maneuver already gave us a bit more advantage. Again, with way to split, you can see where we're sort of split all across that area. We really need to be a bit more clumped, and we can achieve that through different ways, waiting a little bit when we get out of the gates, but we need to be way more grouped and disciplined when we run to the point. Okay. Once again, we try to contest a little bit the road a bit better. As you can see, very few mages of ours are still left on the road, so already, you know, a couple of improvements just from one fight to the other. Okay, and as you can see, there's nobody in that particular area just being caught out, so most of the people got it to the right place. Okay, and this is the third war. This is the war against Dauntless and Winsworth. Of course, some people would argue maybe they didn't have a full roster, maybe they played a bit weaker because they had two wars. But I wanted to focus on what we do, okay? I don't want you to focus so much on what the enemy do. So first of all, a little bit more grouped, still not ideal, but at least we're more as a clump rather than a line, okay, which is always a bit more efficient, okay. And I wanted to see what happens when the enemies try to do the same and outflank us. First of all, we run not as much on the road itself, so we're way more on the right, and you can see straight away that we have way more people sort of trying to hold them while everybody gets to the point. So we have good 3 or 4 teams who are there just basically taking the fight and making sure everybody else gets to their quadrant safely, and that controls them enough. The next thing that happens is this gives us a bit of space because they're not as cocky to be so aggressive, to pull back to second line parallel to the road and control really that area, which forces them to, if they want to flank us, to go really wide. So we want them to do that. We want them to force them to go really wide or fight our best groups, which will be defending that flank. Okay, so all the groups which will be on the road, they'll be defending our right flank as we're looking towards B. And we do that pretty efficiently. You can see virtually everybody gets to the point. Everybody gets into their quadrant, and straight up we get pressure on the point. Okay. The one thing to say is I I would want people to pull back into the quadrant on the point and a bit closer to the point a bit quicker. So everybody made it safely, but there's a lot of people still caught out a little bit. Okay, so we need to be a bit swifter with that, and bruisers need to use their skills to allow us to disengage and get into the right positions. And when I say skills, it's mostly CC, so your gravity wells, your POD, maybe a stun, and then get into the right position ready to combo. But nevertheless, really good control. Okay, so we control them there. They virtually they cannot outflank us. We got straight up pressure on the point, and we're controlling 3 out of the 4 quadrants really well. We take the fight in this right flank quadrant, or the road quadrant, and all in all, the fight on this point goes really well. Okay, so even within 3 fights, an amazing improvement. You can see, you know, basically they cannot outflank us, and some of them have to push on the point as the point is being ticked, which gives our guys around the point very easy access to basically nuke them and hit them with everything they got, which virtually wipes them on the point. Okay, and this is really how we should fight virtually on all the points. Okay, so very easy way to see big improvements that were made even within 3 wars. Okay, the second thing that I wanted to show you is something we got wars at within these 3 wars. Okay, so this was the first war again against Ascent. Let me try to find the right time. Basically it's the way we regroup. Okay, and perhaps this is not necessarily the best example, but in the war against Ascent we always try to regroup 2 points away. Okay, so A was the point that we were trying to capture, and whenever we got out of sync we call the big regroup on C. And what that means is you have the area around the point, and you have your first wave marked with these little circles, and this is the first wave of respawn. Okay, and for argument's sake, let's say that's only half of the roster. You need to wait for the other half to come so you can start to have an equal fight when you re-engage. Okay, and those are the X's. And when we regroup, you really need to wait for the second wave. Okay, and you kind of don't want to do something else, go somewhere else, or just run blindly to the point you need to. The fact that we're doing it 2 points away deterred people to try to do that. So our regrouping was really good in this war. Okay, and we've done that 2 or 3 times, and basically it allows us to have some really good fights. Okay, so this is again the war against Dauntless. So slightly different here. There was a few times when we called a full regroup, mostly on C, and to show you, perhaps this might not be the best example, but you can see they are trying to pressure the point. Of course, if they're attacking the point, you need to defend it, so you need to fight. But we had several situations where we had no enemies, and basically the first wave respawns and people just start running. Okay, and they run towards B, they run towards the war camp, they run, you know, basically they start running, they respawn and they start running. And you know, you're not going to regroup if you do that. You need to wait for your second wave to do a full regroup. So the people who are currently at B, you know, they're most likely dying, so you need to wait for them to die and respawn to be able to regroup. Okay, and people ask, well, where should I regroup? You know, do I just sit on the point and wait to be bombed if they try to rush the point? Well, no. I mean, an easy way, now that we run the quadrant system again, is your mentality as a group should be that that's your spot. You know, let's take group 3 for example. You're in the road quadrant, okay, and that's your spot. So it's very easy to say, okay, we're regrouping in our quadrant. That's all the team leader needs to say, and people should know, okay, we're on the road at 6 o'clock on the right flank. That's it. We're just going to our spot. Okay, you don't need a lot of information, and you know, that allows us, everybody, to know exactly what we need to do, where they need to go. So it gives you a rally point. Okay, Of course, there's other ways, that you can activate your microphone in game, you can wear some fancy shields, but ultimately, if you just go to your normal place where you should be every time on the point, even when we have a big regroup, it should make it way easier for you guys to group up. Okay, and those are the things that I want us to focus in the future, and I want us to minimize all these random response where some teams decide all of a sudden doing a big regroup to respond to war camp because they couldn't find themselves for 15 minutes or whatever. This is just some poor excuses, okay, for basically not being able to regroup because people run somewhere else, or they're uncoordinated or confused where they need to get to, or they don't communicate well. Okay, so you need to communicate well. Team leader needs to coordinate. Okay, this is where we're regrouping. You need to wait for people to actually get there. Okay, and you need to feedback if you're not regrouped. Okay, because if we're missing lots of people and we decide to push together as supposedly 50 people and we only have 30, it's not going to be a good engagement. Okay, and that means we missed really our regroup, and that's important for the points, especially if we're losing a couple of engagement, but it will be super important for the fort itself. Okay, and lastly, and the last thing I want to mention when it comes to what the roster should do and what each of the 5-man teams should do, I wanted to focus a lot on the communication. And when we say communication or talk in your group, it doesn't mean start singing about what you're gonna do in this war and describe every skill with poetry and I'm gonna stun them now and then I'm gonna hit them and I'm gonna Miley Cyrus and after that I'm gonna disengage. No, okay, the really basic stuff is each of the players should call the main skill. Okay, if you're a bruiser, your gravity well. If you're a healer, it's your sacred ground. If you're an IGVG, it's your oblivion. If you fire, well, nothing, because you don't really have a main skill, but you get the drift. Okay, if you call as a minimum your main skill, it allows your team to coordinate or to be more coordinated when it comes to comboing. And it's a lot easier when you debrief at the end of the war within your team to say, well, you're putting your sacreds a bit too early, or oh, you were throwing your gravities a bit randomly and I couldn't follow up because I was too far away. So just that simple communication of your main skill allows people to follow up more efficiently on your skill. So basically you're comboing more efficiently, and then you can tweak things to see what works and what doesn't work for your group to create the biggest impact in the engagement you're having. Because ultimately, the 5-man group is what the game forces us to have. So the more efficient you are at the 5-man level, the more efficient the whole army as a 50-man roster will be like. Okay, so all in all, to recap, we discussed today some of the very basics, including the nomenclature and what we refer to in the wars, and just so people know where to go when we call those specific things. We have discussed the roster itself and the way it will look like, including a splitting with top 5 tier teams and a lower 5 teams. Okay, and it's not really to separate people, it's just to increase the competitivity in the roster itself, but as well allow people to drive themselves to try to get better and bring the right gear, bring the right setup, bring basically what will allow us to be successful. Okay, the second thing we discussed was the strategy itself, how we're going to use the quadrant strategy to our advantage, where our strongest teams will be like, where will they be positioned, and how we're trying to counter the enemy strategies. Of course, as we will define this and we'll rehearse this and we'll make sure we deliver it every single war, we will basically tweak it depending on what enemies we will face to try to mitigate all the differences between the different teams. And thirdly, we went through some examples from our last 3 wars of things that improved just in a matter of 3 days, and something that got worse in a matter of 3 days. And it's simply because people were not focused enough to do the right things. Okay, so it's about if we want to get better and be consistent, we need to embrace these changes, and we need to be consistent. Okay, so we can basically decide what we need to improve and what we should keep the way it is. Okay, so I'm gonna go through any questions, but bearing in mind this is a voice recording of the previous recording, there's not going to be anybody asking the questions. I'm happy to go through any further feedback, or if you have any specific suggestions on this tactical meeting, just feel free to message me. Thank you very much.